And when you talk about the twilight sleep era, the twilight sleep era was a catastrophe because not only was there a cocktail of drugs that included narcotics, but it also included an amnesic drug. So that when the woman, first of all, when the woman was given it, she tended to be very belligerent and fight. And so often they strapped her down, and they strapped her down 4 points. They used wrist straps and ankle straps that came from the psychiatric wards. And I know my mother was covered with bruises when she after giving birth. She had no idea that she'd been punching and screaming and, so this gets deeply embedded in the woman's psyche and in the baby's psyche. And it's what gave rise to the separation of babies in nurseries. There was no such thing as a nursery. I mean, yes, they had nurseries in Europe, but the nurseries traditionally in Europe were just little darkened rooms where cots were placed if the mother wanted to take a walk down the hall or something, and the baby would be in the next room with a couple of other cots with babies in it. But no such thing as an ICU. When we started separating mothers from babies and putting babies in nurseries routinely for hours or a day or two, it was because the mother was unconscious. She was unable to hold her baby safely. And that
she might not
created
sleep for 3 days.
Yeah, she could have been asleep for 3 days. And
or the baby was bruised and they didn't want to bring the baby to her during that time.
And of course,
forceps
there
delivery.
was no breastfeeding, because if you separated the baby from the mother for hours and days, then that baby is not getting skin to skin, is not getting co-sleeping, is not getting the sound of her voice, is not getting to be welcomed, is not getting anything that it needs. And that is the model that we still have in hospitals. We have the baby cared for by one team of professionals called pediatricians, pediatric nurses, and we have the mother cared for by a separate team when they both need to be cared for by the same people.
Yeah.
So that's a huge change. That's a structural change in the system, that nurses need to be cross-trained to care for both the mother and baby as one unit, and they need to be in the same bed or within 3 feet of each other during this care, not down the hall. And then, of course, that gave rise to the notion that babies need their own rooms, and that it's dangerous to sleep with a baby, and that it's dangerous to have the baby too close to you, and the baby needs to have its solitude. So all of this happened when we started introducing drugs.
And in this modern world where we think that we're improving on things that have been going well for so long, mothers keeping their babies nearby, and that are still a part of indigenous cultures, and things are going well there. But here, there's a lot of...
breastfeeding was not a solitary act. Everybody breastfed that baby. Yeah. So it got cross immunity. It didn't just get the mother's immune system, it got everybody else's. And so the mother wasn't under this enormous stress to provide for all the needs of her baby herself alone. And she was not alone. She was seldom alone with a baby. So I have another rule of thumb. One is, skin to skin, 3 to 6 hours a day, 3 to 6 months. Another is keep a baby within 3 feet. And another one is that no woman should be left alone. And I'd say nobody, but no woman for sure, should be left alone with a baby for more than an hour. How many women are alone 8, 10, and 12 hours a day? It breeds insanity. So, and of course, child abuse, child neglect, and incredible depression and guilt and shame. So yeah, I mean, we've created a whole system, and there's no guaranteed paid universal maternity leave or paternity leave. So all of these things that we've created produce the kinds of human beings we have, who vote the way they do about the environment not being important, about why can't we get these neurotoxins like the ones that are in glyphosate, why can't we get those out of Roundup or get Roundup off the market? We have these multi-billion-dollar corporations polluting our children's brain, our women's breast milk, our food, and nobody's doing a thing. Why? Because people have learned to be passive. And it's a learned behavior that happens with shock and trauma, which is just giving up. So it's not that the opposite of being active and involved is passivity. It's learned helplessness. This is why people vote the way they vote, against their own best interests. Learned helplessness. They learned as babies that what they tried to do to communicate had no effect, that they weren't responded to when they cried. I mean, that's just heartbreaking.
It is.
So it's been enculturated in many religions, many cultures. Oh, you're spoiling that baby when you pick it up?
Yeah.
You can't spoil a baby. Spoiling means ruining. You can't ruin it by showing it too much affection.
Too much love? No. We need more love in this world.
Can you harm a toddler by allowing it to dominate what you cook for dinner, so that if it doesn't like what you cook, you try and cook something else, and if that doesn't work, you make a third meal? Yeah, you can screw things up. You can be a helicopter mother or father, but people who do that are themselves highly anxious, and it's society that's made our parents so anxious around children. So
there's a lot of problems out there in so many ways that trauma can happen, and
there's so much ability to heal and integrate. And I think it's really important for people to remember that it is never too late. And when you first begin to be aware of it and can even put a name to it, I was hurt, my baby was hurt, whatever. That's the beginning of the road to healing. And one of the women in our group, the Alliance for Transforming the Lives of Children, said it so beautifully. She wrote a book called Connection Parenting. And she said, it's about raising children so that we don't end up with adults who spend their lives trying to recover from their childhood.
Yeah. And there's so much of that. But isn't it amazing that we somehow have come with a resilience, and that we're able to heal, especially given the right circumstances, and things there's different methods.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that every person is unique in their ability to tolerate stress and shock and trauma. Mm-hmm. And some people are much more vulnerable. I said that boys are by nature, but some people are much more innately resilient. They bounce back. They come into the world that way. And we have to recognize that different people have different levels of tolerance, and we should be giving the best to everybody instead of saying, well, 10% of people will tolerate that, or 80% will tolerate it. I mean, now with what's going on in the world with all of the growing awareness, which despite the kicking and screaming that a lot of people have about it, the growing awareness of the impact of poverty, of the impact of racism, of the impact of hatred of women, of the impact of how we've treated Indigenous people, African Americans, how we've treated nature, that only when this comes to the surface can we do anything about it. It's been under the consciousness, just like birth trauma, under the consciousness, unnamed, and yet running families just as much as people being victims of torture and gas chambers.
Yeah.
So things don't look good right now because we're beginning to recognize just how systemically this runs. And one of the things that's so important for people to understand in healing is it's not your fault. You are responsible for doing something about it now, but it's not your fault. There were always circumstances. Maybe you didn't have enough support. Maybe you didn't have enough education. Maybe, who knows? Maybe you got the wrong nurse, but self-blame and shame have no place in this, because the moment we fall into guilt and self-blame and feelings of shame, all growth stops. So I've had many times people say, don't tell me that because I'm just going to feel guilty. To which I say, well, guilt's going to be a really nice way to make sure you never grow.
Yeah.
Because all you have to say is, I don't want to look at it. So it's very important that we not blame ourselves, blame women, blame each other, but that we look at what were the circumstances? What are the circumstances in our family? What were the circumstances intergenerationally? What were the circumstances in terms of economics, in terms of poverty? What were the circumstances in terms of racism? Racism itself is traumatic. It doesn't matter statistically whether, and this is proven evidence, it doesn't matter whether a Black woman coming to birth has a PhD or whether she is 38, or whether she is a 15-year-old unwed mother whose father raped her. Her chance of giving birth to a low birth weight or premature baby is the same. And I didn't know that. I thought her level of education could change that. But that really shows how deep racism runs and how deep the wound is of being continually treated as if you're not worthy. So I hope this gives people some hope, because it's all up for grabs right now. And the pus is rising to the surface, and it is ugly. The wound is ugly, but the scab is off.
Clean it out.
Yes, yes. And this is
our
the time.
Hearts be free.
Yeah, this is the
And our
time.
societies. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So that's the good news.
I feel a shift in that this is possible. This is something that not only can we do personally, but we can do as a society, that we can be free of all that's been festering under the surface in our lives and in our culture.
And create cultures and systems that actually work for children, that actually place the mother and baby at the center of all values. And
because mothers have such a big part, mothers and fathers have such a big part in creating the future, and because they're with the child who is going to be the future. And when we can heal from things that there's like a lot of things that are against us as we are trying to do this. But if we can break free of that and heal these wounds, what we can do in the future is unlimited. We probably
That's right.
can't even imagine what the future could be like if we can get rid of these
That's
things.
right. And of course, that all comes down to relationship and community, and not isolation, not shame, not being alone, but reaching out to tell the truth and to start to ask for help and to recognize that what happened to you isn't just about what happened to you, and it's not because you did something wrong. It's systemic. It's going on almost everywhere. And the healing is a collective thing as well as an individual thing. So
we need each other.
We need each other desperately. Yeah.
And there's pieces that others have received that they can help. That they can help the family and help to and help the world culturally in these ways. And the relationships, like you say, are so important in this.
But you know, the whole reason I call my work Birthing the Future is that every time a child comes into the world, we are birthing the future. Is it the future we want? And if it's not, then it's up to us to do it differently.
That's so true. And thank you for all of the work that you've been doing, Suzanne, with Birthing the Future and in all of the things that you've done throughout your lifetime. You've made a really big difference, and I'm so grateful that you have followed the this calling to make a difference in the world, because these things are so important. The family is so important. The world is so important, and
children are
really
so
grateful.
Important. Well, thank you.
Yes,
it's nice to be interviewed, because then I remember that my work matters. Otherwise, I'm like a mother with a full breast and no baby. And it's like, wait, I have stuff I want to share.
But here you've been doing so many things, and mothering and grandmothering the world, and helping us all to know the things that we need to do to make the future different. Maybe it hasn't been ideal in a lot of ways. Maybe it's been what we've needed to learn as a culture, but maybe there are steps, and in the future we will be able to live at that place for all of us.
I do believe that.
I think there's a lot of hope. So especially when there's things that we can do, and thank you so much for all that you do, for doing your part, Suzanne. So
Thanks,
appreciate
Jennetta.
you.
Thank you for having me on, and thanks for your work. Ciao.
We'll see you later.
Bye.